Guys, what's going on? IAQ Josh here, and today I wanted to discuss with you the $1,000,000 question. What is the best mold test? But before we jump into that, I want you to know that there are four main types. We have air testing, we have surface testing, we have dust testing, and we also have MVOC, which is going to be our chemical or odor testing. So without further ado, let's get to it. All right, so now let's dive right into things and start off with the discussion on air testing. So we have five main types of air tests, or forms of air sampling, if you will, to choose from. We're going to have spore trap sampling, we're going to have our culturable air samples, we're going to have Instascope, which is going to be your real-time mold detection device. We're going to have Mycometer, which is a near real-time mold detection device that requires a little bit of chemistry on your end. And we're also going to have a newer technology to the industry, which is going to be your airborne mycotoxin testing. So now only two of these types of testing are going to be more commonplace, specifically because of the industrial hygiene background. We're going to have spore trap sampling and culturable sampling being, again, the most common forms of sampling that you're going to see in a setting. So now with spore trap sampling, we're going to have air that is drawn through a cassette. We're going to have a small circular or elongated cassette, depending on the type that you actually purchase, and air is actually going to be drawn down into this cassette. There's going to be a small little slit on top, and ultimately you're going to have what appears to be just like a piece of scotch tape, if you will, that is upside down inside of this cassette, and essentially all of the particulate that gets drawn in is going to stick on this spore trap. Spores get stuck, trapped on here. And ultimately, that slide is going to be something that is then taken, or the cassette, I should say, is going to be taken. It's going to be taken apart by an analyst at a laboratory, and using a methodology known as microscopy, they are actually going to dissect this cassette, if you will, and analyze it under a microscope. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this form of testing is that we cannot distinguish between viable and non-viable, that is living and non-living mold spores. Nonetheless, this is by far the most common method testing used by professionals today. All right, so let's talk a little bit about culturable air sampling. And right off the bat, the number one difference between the two, whereas with spore trap sampling, you cannot distinguish between viable and non-viable samples, the culturable air samples are only going to reflect on those that are viable or living. And that is because the device that you're often using to collect these samples, known as an Anderson cassette, is going to be equipped with petri dishes. Now, these petri dishes are going to be infused, for lack of a better word, with growth media that is going to promote mold to grow on these petri dishes. And then once it does, that's where we can then take it and analyze it. Now, here's another big difference between the two. We can analyze it, or the lab analyst, I should say, at a species level. So whereas spore trap sampling, we are going to be limited to reading things at a genus level or genera, the big difference between this is now we can go from looking at Aspergillus penicillium to Aspergillus fumigatus. So we can actually see at the species level what exactly is growing and what we're dealing with within our indoor environment. Now, again, the downfall to this device is going to be the fact that we are only reading viable mold spores. So it's typically good practice if we're looking for living versus non-living and what's actually going on in the environment. Maybe kind of a combination of the two if we're looking for a broader picture. Okay, so let's get into some of the tech side of our industry and introduce the Instascope. Now, like I said in the opener, the Instascope is going to be our real-time mold detection device. Now, I don't know why I just use air quotes when the device actually does what it says it's going to do, and detects mold spores and fragments in real time. So let's 86 these, shall we? Now, Instascope is quite a revolutionary tool. It's nothing new. It's been around for quite a while. They are actually on their newest version, version 4, which is going to be a nice little small compact device that allows for easy maneuvering around an environment. Where this device is most useful when it comes to mold testing is being able to what's known as source track, right? So let's say we've got something going on in the environment. Maybe somebody is symptomatic. Maybe we have an air sample, for example, that we collected a spore trap sample within a kitchen. And we're trying to kind of figure out where in this kitchen there's a problem. We've kind of already gone through the visual investigation. Nothing stands out. We're not seeing any moisture anywhere. This is the perfect use case for it. And I actually did a video not too long ago where I used the Instascope to help me, I'll call sniff out a problem that was developing underneath a dishwasher, or at least around a dishwasher within that vicinity. So when it comes to source tracking, there really might not be a better tool out there than the Instascope. Next up, we're going to have Mycometer or Mycometer, depending on who you are out there and how you like to pronounce the word. Mycometer is a near real-time mold detection device in that, like the Instascope, it is giving us a broader picture of the fungal load within the environment. We're going to be looking at both mold spores and other pieces of mold, for lack of a better explanation. So now with this, we're getting a very good understanding of the fungal load, like I said, or the fungal contamination within the environment. Differently than the Instascope, this methodology is going to take some legwork. It is going to take some chemistry on your part. Beyond the actual sample collection process, we are going to have to develop the sample to therefore see the results. So kind of like old photography where we had to develop the pictures. The process itself is a little bit longer as far as the sampling process. You will use a cassette. It will be connected to a pump, and it will draw in air for about 15 to 20 minutes depending on the flow rate. Differently than spore trap sampling, whereas spore trap sampling is typically performed within a still or stagnant environment, and there's a lot of debate out there on that, but the standard is still going in and setting up a tripod and collecting your sample in that environment. Within Mycometer's actual recommendations on conducting the process for testing, they actually recommend that you disturb or disrupt the environment with a small electric leaf blower or large. But essentially you go in and we disturb the environment, therefore known as aggressive sampling, and then again with now re-aerosolizing or resuspending mold and other particulate that is otherwise going to be on the ground, we are now going to be getting better representation of what might be floating about as kids are running through, as a dog runs through the house, as we're vacuuming. You can see where there's definitely an argument to be made that the aggressive air sampling process through the use of Mycometer could be a great tool for you. And closing out the discussion on air testing, we have airborne mycotoxin testing. To date, there's only one company that I know of out there that even sells the equipment and has the methodology, directions, instructions, what have you. As I mentioned in the opener, the airborne mycotoxin testing is a newer technology, or let me state that it is a newer technology that has been introduced to us as professionals. I think in speaking with this company, it was probably less than 2 years ago now that this even popped up on my radar. I don't know too much about it, so I can't tell you the strengths, the weaknesses. All I can do is really compare it to the other form of mycotoxin testing that we're going to be discussing later on in this video, which is the dust sampling version. It uses the same analysis, ELISA, and it is looking for the same toxins that are going to be in the environment, but versus on samples within the dust load, we are looking for it in the air. Now, there is also a process with going in and disturbing the air, therefore achieving some level of aggressive sampling to get what they consider to be the most accurate or most representative results. That's about all I know about it. So if you out there, any of my viewers are watching this, and you have anything to share on the airborne mycotoxin testing process, whether it's your experience, whether it's what you've heard out there, please be sure to drop a comment below, as I'm fascinated with all forms of testing. With this being a newer one, I think only time will tell. Let's see what it evolves to. Our very next form of sampling is going to be the surface testing. This is going to include our tape lifts or lift tapes, our swab samples, and also our bulk samples. So now your tape lift is going to be most closely resembling a piece of tape. You are going to have, in often instances, a microscope slide, which might have some tacky adhesive on it, or you're also going to potentially have a clear piece of tape that has a little backer that you peel off. And effectively, you're going to take this tape lift, apply it to a surface with just very light pressure, and lift it off of the surface. Now, where this is going to be beneficial is this is good for confirming the presence of mold on a surface, like spore trap sampling. Because this is going through the microscopy process, we are only going to be able to receive results from the laboratories at a gene. So again, your Aspergillus penicillium versus your speciated level. Now, tape lifts, one thing to keep in mind with them is if we have a moist surface that has what appears to be suspect growth on here, the tape lift is really not going to be your best bet, because that moisture is going to actually influence the transfer of the mold onto the tape. Now, one of the benefits of using a tape lift versus other forms of surface testing is that we can actually see the structure of the mold that is present. So that's something beneficial for an analyst to actually see and have a better idea on what's actually going on within that environment, specifically the location where the sample was collected. Next up is going to be swab sampling. Now, swab sampling, which is basically the use of a sterile swab versus a Q-tip, big difference here. One's sterile, one should not be used for mold sampling, but the sterile swab is going to be very helpful for a professional to collect what appears to be mold from either an irregular surface or a porous surface, or possibly that has dampness on it, right? A moist surface, like we just talked about being one of the drawbacks or limitations of a tape lift sample. The use of a swab sample in these instances is actually very commonplace and very helpful, as it will be able to collect and transfer what is on that surface onto the swab itself. Now, unlike tape lifts, when you are collecting a sample from the surface, you're pretty much disrupting that surface. So versus having a nice square applied evenly across the surface, a swab is just going to get in there and just destroy things, so to speak. So while we will still see the mold spores that are present, the analyst isn't exactly going to be able to see the structure of the mold in the same way that we would see, or any way at all, like we would see with a tape lift. Now, our final form of surface testing or surface sampling is going to be the collection of a bulk sample. If there was an area of this wall that I wanted to sample for mold, and let's say I didn't have any of my sample media with me, I'm just a terrible professional that showed up totally unprepared, which of course never happens. Or, simply put, I'm very new to the sample collection process and maybe want to make sure that I collect mold from this surface correctly. You can always cut into a surface, whether it's a piece of drywall, whether it's a piece of carpeting, a piece of wood, just any substrate that can be taken and put in securely inside of a bag and transferred to a lab can be analyzed for mold. So that is what we would call bulk sampling. And again, unlike collecting a surface using sample media, we're actually bringing that surface to the lab for analysis. moving right along, we are getting into discussion on dust sampling. Now, with dust sampling, we're going to have two primary forms of collection. We're going to have the vacuum and the wipe collection. Once we've collected the dust, we're going to have a couple of different analyses that could be performed, including the ERMI, the HERTS-Me2. Now, these two are DNA-based methods of testing. They're based on qPCR or mold-specific qPCR. If you're wondering, hey, since they're based on qPCR, do I necessarily have to do or elect for the ERMI reporting? And the answer is no. And that's something that maybe a lot of people out there don't know, is you can kind of get a lot of that good information that you get from an ERMI report or even a HERTS-Me2 report, but even a broader list of species of molds that are detected depending on what you request from the lab. So we're not going to do a deep dive into the mold-specific qPCR sampling. Just know that you have ERMI, you have HERTS-Me2, and then you can just go custom, so to speak, where we just want to report on every type of mold or as many types of mold that this laboratory can actually report on using qPCR analysis. Lastly, we've got mycotoxin testing. Unlike what we discussed in the prior chapter, which was the airborne mycotoxin testing, in this chapter we're going to be discussing the dust-based mycotoxin test, whether it is an actual sterile cloth or, like the surface sampling, a sterile swab that we would be using to collect this dust. With respect to the vacuum collection method, there are going to be specialty vacuum cassettes that are out there that can be used in kind of a multitude of different ways. Number one, we do have cassettes that can be attached to your traditional vacuum cleaner, whatever that diameter is, whether it's an inch, 1 1/4 inch, and you can pop that cassette on a regular vacuum cleaner and go around and vacuum up dust. Now, another type of cassette that could be used for vacuuming a surface is going to be a dust-based cassette, which is going to be something that might even be weighted to where they have an initial weight of that cassette empty, right, with nothing else in it, and then what they can do is after you vacuum a surface, they can weigh it and compare that to, and then what we do is we have an idea of not only the contents that are in there, but also the quantity in terms of weight. And this could be used for measuring the success of a PRV if we're cleaning to a dust removal or as close as we can get to that level. This could be a good way to do that. And then we also have the wipe method, where we are collecting the dust using either, like I just mentioned, a sterile piece of cotton or even a sterile swab. And then this could be collected and then sent in for analysis. So it's very common practice out there, and I say common, but limited to the mold-specific community, that are using Swiffer cloths to actually collect the dust and send those in for analysis. If you are using the Swiffer-based method, me being somebody that is a little crazy and overanalyzes things, I would almost want to submit a blank Swiffer from that same packaging and then one that I collected dust on. Now, we need a certain amount of dust to be able to run certain analyses that are done through qPCR analysis, so I'm not quite sure what we could do with that blank sample, but I have to think it's just more of a prudent or professional approach to have something we're comparing to, but I digress. Clearly, I don't know a tremendous amount about the sample collection process using a Swiffer. If you do, I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to chat about it. And if I'm incorrect in my thinking, I'd love for you to educate me on why that is. But that's kind of a general overall summary of the dust collection when it comes to the qPCR analysis. Now, for the mycotoxin analysis, same process where we're collecting it. We're not using vacuum cassettes though. In this case, we are only using a surface collection via wiping. And then this is going to be sent in for analysis. The method that they're going to be using is ELISA. And again, like the airborne mycotoxin testing, we are looking for toxins within the indoor dust that might have been settled out, which is going to give us maybe a broader picture of the toxins that have developed and accumulated over time. And when we look at settled dust, this typically will give us a good idea of what our long-term potential exposure is within an indoor environment. Last up, but certainly not least, is going to be MVOCs, which are our microbial volatile organic compounds. Now, unlike the previous forms of testing that we've been discussing, which are all particle-based or particulate, we're now talking about the chemical side of things, or the gaseous/gaseous side of things, which through the mold metabolism process, we are going to have these MVOCs that actually off-gas into the environment. So now, to kind of put it in perspective, if you've ever walked into a department store or even an old home and you start to smell kind of those musty, damp, moldy-like odors, that's probably going to be the MVOCs that are given off into that environment, and quite frankly, we've probably got some fun stuff going on behind the scenes. Now, the collection or the sampling process for MVOCs is unique in nature and different from the previous forms of testing that we've talked about. To collect MVOCs and even just regular non-microbial VOCs from an environment, we're going to use what's known as a SUMA canister, or a mini canister, or what I most commonly use for a small sample duration, a sorbent tube. And we're basically going to be drawing in these MVOCs into these devices, thereby capturing them and sending them off to a laboratory for analyses. Now, the labs are going to use a process known as GCMS to analyze the MVOC samples that we submit, and ultimately they are going to report on the presence of MVOCs. However, they will not speciate, for lack of a better explanation, between the different types of mold that may be present. If you are looking to get additional information on what these MVOCs relate to, that's where these prior forms of testing that we discussed are going to be beneficial in pairing those with this form of a chemical test to have a broader picture and better understanding of your indoor environment. All right, guys, so now that we know a bit more about the various types of mold testing, from the air testing to the surface to the dust, and also the MVOC testing, it brings us back to the question that we started with, which is, what is the best mold test? The answer is all of them. And here's why. All of these forms of testing that I discussed prior have advantages. Of course, they also have disadvantages, but each and every different type of test is going to provide you with a different metric or a different data set. Now, in a perfect world, time and budget aside, you have all of the testing done. To summarize here, my recommendation for you, if you are seeking the best mold test, would be to find the most qualified indoor environmental professional that you can find. There's plenty of resources out there. Pairing the tests that the qualified professional recommends to you with what I consider the single most important part of any mold assessment is a thorough, comprehensive, exhaustive visual investigation. That is looking around with a flashlight, that is using other handheld tools like multimeters, thermal imaging cameras, handheld fogging devices. But most importantly, it is these guys right here, having a qualified professional, that same IEP in most situations, go methodically throughout your property, the attic, the interior living space, if you have a crawl space, the crawl space, and any adjoining spaces. It is imperative that that is the number one thing that you do, regardless of any mold test that you have performed. If you found this video helpful, please help me out and give this video a big thumbs up. Please also feel free to share this with any of your friends, family, colleagues, etc. And if you want to see more videos like this, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. I will talk to you soon.